Hi everyone, we're going to continue in our series, Can Jewish People Accept? This is part 3, asking whether Jewish people can accept. Genesis 49 verse 8 to 12 is about Jesus. And in this passage you'll find out that Judah will hold the control of the kingship of Israel until the ruler Shiloh comes. And that means a permanent ruler will come, and he's the Messiah, you'll see. And then he will receive obedience from all the people, which is what you would expect for the Messiah. And you'll also see this prophecy about his garments will look soaked from the blood of grapes. Okay, so one of the first steps of doing analysis is to see if the Dead Sea Scrolls has coverage of the particular passage involved, or was it too damaged to make any use of. And then we have to resort to later sources that are not as, well, they're further along in time and maybe more subject to having made copying errors. Unfortunately, it will not work. This is all that remained of Genesis 49. So you have verses 1 through 8. And if you look at the yellow highlights, those are the only words that survived. All the rest are brackets of what they think is in between those little yellow pieces of scraps that they had. So there's literally nothing substantive. So we cannot rely upon the Dead Sea Scrolls to help us. Okay, and as an alternative, what we're going to do is, it's my favorite reading of the Torah is the commentary on the Torah by Richard Elliott Friedman, and he did a new translation. This goes back to 2001. Doesn't mean he's perfect, but he's good, and he's trustworthy, and he's a Jewish uh, 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 translator. So, amongst the Jewish audience here, I think you will accept him. And then he is translating from the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. So this is basically the Leningrad version here. Okay, here's a more detailed explanation from Wikipedia of what the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia means. It means it's abbreviated as BHS, or rarely BH4, is an edition of the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible as preserved in the Leningrad Codex and supplemented by Masoretic and text critical notes. It is the fourth edition of the Biblia Hebraica series started by Rudolf Gettel and is published by the Deutsche Bibelgesellschaft, German Bible Society in Stuttgart. Okay, so it's in my recollection, it comes from about 1000 AD, the Leningrad Codex, and I think it's the oldest codex of the Masoretic text. So what I'm going to do, for those who like to look at the biblical Hebrew, I'm going to put up what Mr. Friedman provided in his book. So he has both the left side of his own pages with his own verses, and then he carefully numbers the Hebrew. If you look carefully, you'll see chapter 49. You'll see verses 1 and 2 on the right. So that's what I'll try to make sure it always corresponds. So let's read this. And Jacob called to his sons and said, "Gather, and I'll tell you what will happen to you in the future days. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father." So he's got the 12 sons listening. He's on his deathbed, and he's going to give them a prophecy of future days. Okay, now we'll move on to verses 8 and 9. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand on your enemy's neck. Your father's sons will bow to you. A lion's whelp is Judah. From prey, my son, you've risen. He bent, crouched like a lion and like a feline. Who will rouse him? So without looking at any commentary, you can just see Judah had superiority over his brothers. Remember, he was the good brother and he took care of Benjamin. So we'll see now. We'll read the comment by Mr. Friedman on this. So this is his comment on what this means so far. It may be significant, so let's just read it. Reuben is demoted from firstborn preeminence. Simeon and Levi are condemned to be scattered. So see, some brothers aren't doing that good. The fourth-born Judah is the one to receive praise, success, and dominion. The fulfillment will come when Judah becomes the largest of the tribes, and its royal family, the kings descended from David, rule for centuries and hold the what? The messianic promise. So it wouldn't surprise us, would we, if there's actually a reference to the Messiah in this particular passage, would it? Shouldn't. Judah was the brother who saved Joseph's life, who promised to be the protector of Benjamin, whose relationship with Tamar resulted in the birth of the clan of the future kings of Israel. So there's an old connection with Benjamin, and he'll be important in another time we discuss his prophecy of the tribe of Benjamin again. The patriarchs will all be buried in Hebron, the capital city of the tribe of Judah. So it's like all the fathers, Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, I think. The patriarchs will all be buried in Hebron, the capital city of the tribe of Judah. Here at the end of Genesis, we find the denouement of the stories of the brothers, and we are made aware of their significance for the future. So it's just giving us a general overview. Okay, so that number one, the most important thing is this is a prophecy. Okay, and so verse 10 is the scepter won't depart from Judah, or a ruler between his legs until he comes to Shiloh, and people's obedience is his. So we'll leave it there, and we're going to get to 11 later. Immediate question that arises here is that this word, this sentence, or the third sentence down there is until he comes to Shiloh. That is not the traditional order or translation at all. The traditional translation is until Shiloh comes. And there's a tendency in the more modern era to try to find a way to not say that. The traditional view, going all the way back to the 1st century AD, the first 100 years, the view was that this was the reference to the Messiah. The Messiah would come, and so it makes sense that way if you think about it, because it's saying the scepter, the right of rule over Judah, like a king, or a ruler between his legs, which means the scepter which would sit between his legs, will not be taken from Judah until he comes to Shiloh. And it doesn't mean until Shiloh comes. It does not mean that somebody's coming to take it away. It's until Shiloh arrives, and he will assume permanency to it. It will never leave at all from the right of Judah to control the other 12 tribes, or the other 11 tribes, excuse me. So to add in the word he is kind of a disjointed thought. It doesn't make sense, and now it's just talking about him coming to a town. So what would happen? So then that would mean, because you've gotten rid of it's a person who actually would take the role of a permanent ruler, it now looks like until you will lose the right of control or right of reigning when someone comes to Shiloh, the city. See, it doesn't have any permanency when you get rid of when you take Shiloh and you make it the city you're going to rather than the name of the person who is to come, and he's to take control permanently. I found a modern source that still agrees that the subject is the word Shiloh, and they then translate that word as tribute, which is a whole nother midrash that you come around, that Shiloh means somehow gift instead of what it really apparently really means is a sort of peacefulness coming. So this is the Israel Bible, and it says Shiloh means tribute. So, and it translates this as that tribute shall come to him. So you see, it's still ingrained somewhere. Some people still understand that, but now they're trying to find another way to translate the word Shiloh. The contrary can be seen in the JPS of 1917. There it's at the bottom, 4910. It says, as long as men come to Shiloh. And there's no plural there, so it's kind of confusing. And yet it still has this same structure as Mr. Friedman has. So, but I'm laying it out to you because you have to make a decision, the viewer, what you want, not want, but what is really legitimate. And so there's a lot of reasons this is being transferred, trying to get it away from what it was always viewed as within Judaism, within the Jewish rabbis. Okay, so this is my notes on it myself. My comment: as the rabbis in all prior versions had it, Shiloh was the subject of the word come. So Shiloh shall come. And the scepter rule implicitly never ends when he comes, because when Messiah arrives, that's who all the rabbis said it was, Judah's rule is permanent, an eternal type of reign. Otherwise, just think of the opposite. The scepter won't depart until someone comes to Shiloh, and then it does depart, because you've not identified the person as Messiah, so it literally is a destructive thing. It's a negative promise. It's not a good promise. So clearly, textually reading, the rabbis were always correct that this has to be the Messiah, and they had reason. In fact, you'll see they actually just translated it in the first century, in the first 100 years. They just simply said this is what it means as a literal rendering, not as an analogy or midrash or anything. Also have a second comment on the right there. The next sentence kind of tells you the same point because it says the people's obedience is his. So if that's true, if it doesn't say Messiah, if Shiloh is a Messiah, then it's saying some single person will have all the obedience of the people, but we just don't know who this is, and he's not necessarily the Messiah because we haven't established that's what this is about yet. Because now in the modern era, we're taking that away. We're removing that understanding that the rabbis all had previously. Okay, and my third point is the next sentence identifies an ultimate and last ruler. So yeah, I think I've already said that. And thus the scepter of control never truly ends. It's an eternal reign. So that's the only way this makes sense in my view. You may disagree. And I have to ask the question, do you think this might be rejected in part because of the Christian use of this for evangelism? I don't know. The point is that you have to make an assessment, the viewer, as I provide you both sides of everything. Always give people both points of view. You can see I'm using actually Friedman. I love Friedman's Torah. I love his work and his sensitivity and his spirit. So nothing is said negatively about Mr. Friedman. It's just what's really the meaning here. And I think he's doing his best. No criticism of him. Okay. But we fortunately in the modern era, it's amazing what resources you can get online. So we do have the actual Hebrew in a interlinear, and it's at this website. So if you go to the right side there, so he was doing this. I showed you the Wikipedia said this Stuttgartensis is from the Leningrad Codex, and here's the Leningrad Codex in interlinear form, and this is at www.scripturesforall.org online linear, and it's got the words in there. So you can see, if you look closely at your screen, you'd see it says, until that he shall come, Shiloh, Shiloh. It's kind of interesting. There's 2 times his name appears. And to him, expectation of peoples. So those are the literal words, okay? So I don't know Hebrew, and I'm not going to pretend to, but I'm going to only say, the rabbis all said this meant Shiloh shall come. So there is a he there in this text, but it doesn't seem to say he shall come to Shiloh. I don't see where the word to is or the direct object. But again, that could be an issue of Hebrew, that if you could see these words on the page, the Hebrew letters, maybe it tells you, oh yeah, it says to Shiloh. Or could Shiloh be the subject? So anyway, that's just gives you a little background of how to look below the surface and see what you can find. You also have the benefit of looking at the Leningrad Codex, is they also provide you what they think is the literal words on the page. So this is what they say it is. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver. I've seen that before. That's an actually important change. That when he's holding that ruler in his hands, it's sort of like a idiom where it's really saying someone who gives law or issues law. Nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Okay, so that to me tells me this is a solid meaning if that's how it literally reads. Okay, so here's the very first commentary on the right side here, from literally 100 AD. They call it 2nd century scholar, but he's writing it right at the cusp. And at that time, it's read as until Shiloh comes, not that he comes to Shiloh as Mr. Friedman has it. So here's Onkelos. He's he translated the entire Torah, the Pentateuch, into Aramaic. In his Aramaic version of the Torah, he translates this version literally as until the Messiah comes, to whom the kingdom belongs. And this is in Art Scroll Bereshit's Genesis Torah Commentary, Volume 1b, page 2152. So this is what's going on in the very first century, basically, just on the cusp of the turn to 100 AD. And you'll also see that actually, as summarized at the where Rashi is quoted verbatim, it says Onkelos renders, so it means he's translating it. Ellicott, a Christian commentator, will say it's paraphrased, but Rashi is saying this is literally what it means, and he's writing 1013 when he dies in 1013 AD. So he's claiming that's what he understood Onkelos was doing. He was translating, not interpreting or anything. This is literally what he thought it meant. Until Messiah come, whose is the kingdom? So just a little background on Onkelos. He was a Roman national who converted to Judaism in Tanaic times. That's somewhere between 35 to 120 Christian era. He is considered to be the author of the Targum Onkelos, which was issued around 110 Christian era, or Common Era, I guess they call it. But I'm going to call it Christian era if you don't mind. Okay, and the next major rabbi to look at this is Rabbi Rashi. His name is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, but he was called Rashi. He died in 1105 AD, and this was his commentary on the words "until Shiloh comes." It was not until he comes to Shiloh at that time, at least that was now being viewed. So until Shiloh comes, he says this. This refers to the King Messiah, to whom the kingdom belongs. And so did Onkelos render it. By rendering, he's not saying interpreted it, but rendering, translated. So he translated into the Aramaic Pentateuch. And then he rendered it, quote, until the Messiah comes to whom the kingdom belongs. So he's telling you how it appeared in the Bible of Onkelos. And he's going along with that. He agrees with that. You'll find this quote in Genesis Rabbah, edited by Theodore Julius and Albach Chanak, Jerusalem, Mormon, 1965, at page 1210. By the way, in case you're interested, you see there's a site there, chabad.org. You can look up anything by Rashi by verse, and you get these references. That's how I found that book there. So you can double check everything yourself. Okay, so this is all with the internet. You can almost do anything, it turns out. So now we have Onkelos at 100. We have Rashi at about 1,000 years. What happens? Who's the next person in line? I mean, there's several others. I'm just going to show you the big highlight ones. And then there's Rabbi Sforno in about 1500 AD. And if you look at his biography, he lives in Italy, and he's just very well studied, studies Hebrew and everything. And he's studying to be a doctor, and very, very well regarded person. So even Rabbi Sforno in about 1500 saw it the same way. Sforno's comment on until Shiloh comes was, the prophecy of Jacob that Judah will be ruler and judge only among his brothers will be so until Shiloh comes, i.e. the Mashiach. But when Mashiach appears and there will be Shalom Basof, I guess that's the Jewish transliteration of the Hebrew, peace at the end, those who remain will be obedient to and subjugated to Shiloh, Mashiach. And you'll find that quote in the book of Pelcovitz, Rabbi Raphael Sforno, entitled Commentary on the Torah, Brooklyn, New York, Masora Publications, 1987, page 234. Okay, so I think so far, it seems to me well established of how it was understood. Whether the modern movement to try to change this is because it's somehow obvious or not, I don't know. This is something you can investigate. You may know Hebrew better than I, but it seems to me that the weight of authority goes here, and just the sense of it, it doesn't make sense if he's not the Messiah. Shiloh doesn't mean exactly what Onkelos said it meant when he was living in 100 AD, and he was closer to the time when they would all know these things more readily. Okay, and one more piece of information, and this is outside of the Jewish tradition. This is in the Christian realm of commentary on Shiloh. So Ellicott says that as to Shiloh, this would mean peaceful or peacemaker, and agrees with the title given to the Messiah by Isaiah. Just another factor. Just thought you'd also like to know that for those people who love the Septuagint, I get all kinds of people who claim the Septuagint's great. Well, and here, instead of Shiloh, the Septuagint Greek translated, it offers another mistranslation. Thus, the 70 has, quote, he has it, he for whom it is laid up. That doesn't even make sense. So another mark against ever using the Septuagint to try to understand any text. Okay, so this next commentary is on the word, the fourth line, and the people's obedience is his. This actually is another important determining factor of who this is. Is this the Messiah, and who is the Messiah in relation to other prophecies? So let me read this to you. This is a criticism of Ellicott on Rashi. So listen to what he has to say. The word used here is rare, and the translation of gathering was a guess of Rashi. Really, it means obedience, as is proved by the other place where it occurs, Proverbs 30, verses 17. This is Ellicott's commentary. And even though it's a Christian, it matches what even Friedman realizes. So it does mean obedience, okay? And Rashi may have said something different. But why is this indicative of who Jesus is, for example? Why would this be important? So hear me out. Okay, so I said that there's something in this verse, the people's obedience is his, is another indication that Jesus is the Messiah. So in traditional rabbinic teachings, the passage of Deuteronomy 18:15-19 was a prophecy of someone called the prophet, because God put a special injunction over his words, and that every word he teaches you has to be followed. And if you do not follow him, you will pay the price. God will hold you accountable, and I'm going to quote that language so you see why that is so, why the rabbis thought this has to be the same as the Messiah. So the quintessential aspect about this prophet isn't that you just listen to him and listen to his warnings. Is if he gives you a Torah, if he gives you a teaching of what you must do that. So even though you don't accept at this moment what Apostle Peter's role is in the original church, whether it's valid or not, I'm assuming the audience doesn't. You need to be informed. What are some of the teachings? And this is some of the areas where I hope to open up and illuminate your awareness of what was taught, that was legitimately taught. Apostle Peter in Acts 3, verses 22-23 said Jesus fulfilled the prophecy of the prophet in Deuteronomy 18, verses 15-19. The key thing in there is God says, you shall listen, which, by the way, one of the things God says from heaven over Jesus in what's called the Transfiguration was listen to him, and multiple witnesses happen for that too, and that was quoting Deuteronomy 18:15-19. Anyway, so what's in Deuteronomy 18:15-19? Verse 19, I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. So there's a heavy injunction over listening to Jesus, which is why I'm trying to urge you to do so. Peter quoted around 34 AD. This was the second sermon of Christianity, and the main focus, therefore, of who Christ was, who Jesus was this passage. Somehow it's been lost even in Christianity. You people think they don't even know what is the verse that most applies to Jesus and proves what our obedience is towards him, and a lot of Christians don't even know this passage. Anyway, so he tells them, Peter quoted it around 34 AD, and he says in verse 22, you must listen to everything he tells you. He's actually quoting the verse. Anyone who does not listen to him will be completely cut off from their people. So that's a little bit of an embellishment he made there of what the consequence is, but I think that's right. God said, I'm going to hold anyone accountable who does not listen to him, and he was trying to give them a warning of what that might mean. So anyway, that's why from a biblical standpoint, Deuteronomy is about a Messiah too. I mean, the Messiah, and it's cross-secting with this Messiah in Genesis 49, verse 11, and then of course with the verse 10. Okay, so I think I've covered this as much as necessary. Okay, and now we're up to the I call it the denouement, the revelation of what this can't be anybody but Jesus kind of point I want to make here. So this is what it says in the actual words in the last verse 11. We can read it all over again. Tying his donkey to the vine and his she-donkey's foal to the choice vine, he washed in wine his clothing and in blood of grapes his garment. Now, if you read the commentators, even the Christian commentators, are going to say, oh, this is just to show that he has a lot of money. He's got a donkey. He's got a female donkey. They got foals. They got choice vines. They have so much wine they can wash their clothing in it, you know, that's kind of thing. And the blood of grapes on their garment, it just shows how much affluence they have. Gobbledygook. People do not use common sense. Do you wash your clothes in the blood of grapes? Absolutely not. Your clothing will be completely stained. You know, that's not how people want to go around looking shabbily in that kind of stuff. So no, that's not the only meaning. It's a hyperbole maybe of being wealthy, but that's not what this is about. So anyway, but I'm telling you, Gil, for example, just explains what I just told you. Why they washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes, and hyperbolic expressions setting forth the great abundance of wine in their tribe. So even Christian commentators are blind. They don't get it. So don't worry. But it's clear. What else can this be? You don't clean your clothes in the wine. I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense. You use what? Water. You could even use, water that isn't even drinkable to clean your clothes. It loosens dirt. You do not use wine. Why? Because wine is precious. Why would you use wine to clean clothes? Oh, it's just unbelievable how people don't interpret things sensibly. So what's going on? This is a prophecy about someone who had to have his clothes besmirched, if you will, by blood, and it will look like blood of grapes. And one thing you need to know, well, Jesus is on the cross. He's not wearing many clothes, so how is he getting any blood on anything? Well, he had before that. He's standing next to Pilate, and this is the way John, his apostle, in chapter 19, verse 5, records it. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And the Pilate said unto him, Behold the man, echo homo. So that's the moment in which that blood is dripping from his forehead down his face. And if the Shroud of Turin has any validity, and I think it does, you can see right in the photo shot of his face, the blood is dripped down over his, into his eyebrows, and he's dripping in blood when he's standing there in front of Pilate, because thorns are very painful and very sharp and cutting into your skin. So he is dripping with blood. He's got blood spots all over his robe. And he's probably been standing for a very long period of time with that stupid robe on because of all the hearings are going on and the crowds cheering and whatever. It was just a chaotic scene, right? So this is literally fulfilled by Jesus. And I don't know how else you can say it, but it's like, who else could this be? So again, I hope this strengthens your attention to paying attention to Jesus Christ. I want to cite one more person, and that's Justin Martyr, who saw the same thing I'm telling you. So this is a Christian commentator. So he lived around AD 100 to 169. I guess he lived until 169. He wrote in reference to Deuteronomy 32 verse 15 and Genesis 49:11 in his book called Dialogue with Trypho, a Jew. So he's having a dialogue, and so they both know the scriptures, right? And this is around 160 AD, and he says, of whose blood Moses, when speaking in a parable, said that he would wash his garments in the blood of the grape. And he meant that he's saying this is, Moses spoke of Jesus in a parable. So I kind of think that's actually a good way of looking at it. This is like a parable. This isn't meant to be taken literally. All the people who were listening to Jesus didn't understand some of his sermons because they were taking everything literally. It's a parable. You have to figure out what the meaning of these items are in there. And again, the Christian commentators are they just think literally. It means you've got a lot of grapes and wine, and you're so rich you'll just clean your own clothes in wine instead of water. That's sick. It does not make any sense. Anyway, I hope that helped you there. Of course, the true story is this is a prophecy of Jesus. This is a prophecy undoubtedly about the man Jesus who the story, and you can't even make this stuff up because it's just it's so real to life. Like, this could happen. Somebody put a crown of thorns on him. Had that not happened, he probably would have had no blood dripping on the exterior of his clothes. Did someone think of, hey, let's add in that story the crown of thorns so that This will then prove why, he's the Shiloh. Could someone be this machinician? You'd have to be a scholar to know there's even this verse. And think about all the Christian scholars who don't even see this, and they're Christians. To a man, none of them thought about what I'm telling you. Not I'm one of them. I'm not a genius. To me, I just immediately I go, who would wash their clothes in wine? It just doesn't make sense. One of them said, sure, he was so rich he could wash his clothes in wine. It doesn't make sense. So you see, this is the problem: is you can't take everything too literally, and you have to see there's a God veils his messages sometimes, but again, if you use common sense, do people wash clothes in wine? The answer is no. They would wash it in water. And if you want to show you're wealthy, there'd be other ways to show how wealthy someone is other than having them do something that's ruining their clothes by washing it in wine. So this is a prophecy that this is what will happen in Judah in the latter days. Remember, this is prophetic. So this to me is the clearest indication, that final verse, that this is a prophecy of the Lord, of Jesus, the Messiah. So I pray to God you'll take that seriously. Okay, I may have some more comments. I don't know. We'll see. Yes, I have one more comment, and that is because there's one more verse to the passage. So this is a little bit mysterious. Still talking about this Shiloh. He has eyes darker than wine. This is in Friedman's translation. And teeth whiter than milk. Very strange. What does it mean? Nobody really knows. But here the interesting thing is Cambridge says that there's two other early translations of this or references to it, and they like this version better. The versions of the LXXX, which is 70 in Latin, which means the Septuagint when you translate it back, and the Vulgate give another rendering, which is probably to be preferred. His eyes are more sparkling than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. That makes more sense. Darker than wine, that, what does that mean? His eyes are, blood red from wine. So that doesn't fit the picture, the positive picture that's supposed to be for Shiloh. So this makes more sense to me, and even the Septuagint, which is usually way off on stuff, it has some more sense to what would be the right words. Okay, so there it is. I presented it. You can think about everything I said and make a decision yourself. Did this have any more persuasive value for you? I weighed all the different viewpoints. I didn't hide anything. I lay it all out. I give you everybody's explanations. And when it comes to religious documents, people get very protective, and they'll even try to change it through translation or whatever. And that's a human frailty. So we constantly have to deal with that. But as individuals, we are trying to pursue God. We're trying to obey God. And if Jesus is the prophet, not just Messiah, but he overlaps with the Deuteronomy 18 prophet, then you and I both have a duty to obey his words. And you want to know something? They're not that hard. Jesus even said, my burden is light. He said he's not trying to give you a heavy load of commands, but he gives you commands that are good for you, good for your life. Be humble, be forgiving, all these kind of virtues. This is what he's teaching you, and it's not going to hurt you. And again, I suggest that just open up to Matthew. Skip to the Sermon on the Mount. I think it begins around chapter 5, and you can read a little bit before that. Get a flavor of what he's teaching, and then see if this does not create inside of you a recognition that this person, he does in every way you can match what you saw in this prophecy today about Shiloh. What about for yourself? Would you just listen to what he teaches you for life? Just start there. See if you can start there before you get into all the other doctrinal problems that Christian history has presented, and you think maybe it's anti-Semitic. It is not. It was not the Jesus of Nazareth. He wasn't. So that's for sure. Anyway, God bless you. I hope this helped everybody. I hope you will find time to open up. Even online, you can do it. You can just go to BibleGateway.com and you can read any Bible, and you can even read the JPS online. Well, that wouldn't be the New Testament, but you can read. There's some books. There's some versions that are meant for Jewish people to read, and they use more vocabulary that maybe you're more familiar with. Okay, God bless. I hope this helped everyone. Ciao.